um, so we can start with Fahima and go in order of the screen. If you can introduce yourself, say your name, your program, and what university you attend.
Hey everyone, it's so nice to be here. My name is Fahima, like Nika said. I am a third year grad student in the social area in the Rutgers-Newark Psych department.
Hello, I am Valeria. I'm a fourth year student also in the social area of the psych department at Rutgers.
Hi everyone, my name is Taisha Blanc. I am a first year student at the clinical psychology program at George Washington University in DC.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. So we're going to get started with a few questions that we've come up for the panelists. We also have a few questions that we asked from our students on our Instagram account. So a lot of the students who have asked questions are students who are starting to apply to grad school, thinking about applying to grad school, or just are wondering if grad school is the right fit for them. So one of the questions that we got asked a lot is, how did you choose your advisor and your program? When did you start looking for an advisor? How did you go about doing that? And we can go in the same order if anyone wants to jump in, get us started.
Go. So you want to know about how I started and how did we identify an advisor? So I think I started thinking about grad school in my second year of undergrad, but I actually got into grad school a year after my master's. But yeah, I had an eye out for research that I was interested in, and I was looking at who was doing that research. And when I started preparing to apply to grad school, the time I got in, I think a year ahead, I started looking at different people's research and like noting down their names, and then looking them up on their, like university websites, and seeing if it looked like they may be interested in accepting students. And then I bookmarked them. And then the summer before I applied, I reached out to those professors, asking them if they were accepting students, just to confirm that I'm not gonna, like apply to a program where the professor is not accepting students, because that would just be a waste of funds. In terms of how did I choose, I think, sorry, what was that part of your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, it was mainly research fit. And then it kind of came down to the interviews and just the discussions that I had with the professors and whether we seemed to hit it off. And another thing that I did, I had limited opportunity to do this because I'm an international student. So my connections with people in academia in the US were very limited. But I was also able to kind of put out a few feelers and sort of see how the professors kind of get to know more about the professors, like personality and their working style, in besides from just like the work that we see in terms of like their journal articles and stuff like that.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And I'm so sorry I skipped into the questions before all the panelists had introduced themselves. We have one more panelist. If you could introduce yourself, your name, and the program. So sorry about that.
Hi, good afternoon. That's okay. My name is Latoya Gaines. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I'm a graduate of the Graduate School of Applied and Professional Psychology, otherwise known as GAZAP, at Rutgers in New Brunswick.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Sorry about that. So yeah, we can, to rephrase the question, where students are wondering how to go about picking an advisor and the right program for them, whether that's research or other programs.
Well, I kind of did the same kind of search that Fahima just described, where I would just look for advisors that were doing research that I was interested in. And then made sure that they were accepting students a few months before actually applying. And then obviously I wouldn't apply to the schools that had advisors I was interested in that weren't accepting students that year. And I actually went to Rutgers-Newark as an undergrad student, and I also did my master's there. And so I ended up choosing the advisor that I've been working with since I was an undergrad, when I was an RA for him. So I think obviously I was interested in the research, and that's like a huge reason as to why I went with the advisor that I went with, but also because of the program and kind of what Fima was saying, like you get a feel for how your advisor works, and also I think importantly, like a feel for the program, the department that you would be in. Yeah, so that's how I ended up going with the advisor that I have.
Thank you.
To add on to what they've both said already, I think a big part for me was also reaching out to the grad students for the advisors that I'm interested in, to kind of get like a more realistic, like, I'm not gonna say the advisors are not gonna be realistic, but I think the student's gonna give you a more realistic viewpoint of how the advisor works. And I think that was like a big point for me, because I wanted to make sure that their style, their work ethic might fit well with mine, or just like their way of being an advisor might be effective for me. So that was like a big part of choosing an advisor and also choosing the school. I actually, in the first few stages, I limited myself to areas closer to home, because it's only my mom and I, and that's like my everything. So I didn't want to branch out. But I have an amazing mentor, or mentors at Rutgers University, who kind of pushed me into spreading my wings a little. And guess where I ended up? In DC, 4 hours away from home. So you try not to limit your options, as scary as it might be. I will always say that. So I found an advisor that kind of, I say this and I think Dr. Boxer will take it well, but I found an advisor that kind of matched his style at DC, which helped me a lot, because I'm able to get the assistance I need. And I know that I'm also, I guess, just the program in itself, which is a big part. They're very welcoming and they care about you. And so far, that's been my experience. So those were the big things that made me choose the advisor and the school, I guess, or program that I'm at.
So for me, my search first started with deciding whether or not I wanted to go to a PhD program or a PsyD program. I was a school psychologist prior to applying to any doctorate program, and it was through that experience where I knew I wanted to continue with clinical work. I love doing therapy. So doing my research, I felt that a PsyD program was probably a better fit than more of a research program. And so when I started researching schools, I started to look to see what schools had programs that would fit my interests in terms of having a social justice oriented focus, a commitment to serving underserved populations, and what faculty members at those schools were really in the trenches doing that work. And as I was doing the research, Rutgers was really the best fit for that. And it was also important to me to have a mentor who was a woman of color. And on the faculty, there was actually more than one that I could choose from. So that was pretty awesome. And so that's really how I came to my decision to apply to Rutgers. And, thankfully I got in, and, I was able to work with mentors who were really focused on working with children and young adults who were came from underserved communities. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Our next question is more for PhD programs, but I'm interested, and I'm sure students are, about deciding what areas of clinical aspects to focus on. But the question basically is, how did you solidify your research topics, and how much of how much were you able to do that, and how much did you have to rely on your advisor and the program structure to solidify your research topics?
Just to clarify, are you saying like in the application process, or like currently, right? Like currently?
That's a good question. This is one of our questions from our student. I would say maybe if you want to touch on both, but most of our students are in that application process, so maybe leaning more towards application.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna start it off being that like I'm first semester, first year student. So I think for me, one of the biggest things that I made sure during like my application process is to mention the research that I want to pursue in the program that I go into. So that was like the biggest thing. And also, if you already started the graduation application process, you will know that that's one of the questions anyways. But making sure that I pretty much had a focus. I wasn't too broad in what I wanted to do, but I also wasn't way too specific where it would be like, I'm just stuck on this idea and I won't look at anything else. So that's one thing that I would advise not to do. Don't be too specific. If it is something that you want to go into, of course, it's good to talk to your advisor about it once you get into the program, but don't limit yourself in the application, because that's one thing that they're looking at as well. Right now, I will say in the program, with the data that's already here, or the data I want to collect, it does go into like advisor, but it's more so about me as well. So my advisor is the type of person, like, she wants to know what I want to look at, and let's find the data that I can use to do my research. And I'm still very much in the working process of figuring out the specifics to what I want to do, hence why I wanted to start. But it's really more so about making sure you know what you want to study, and making sure that in the application process, you find that advisor that will help you grow in that specific area. I think that's like the best way for me to explain, especially due to the fact that I'm still like in the starting process for me.
What I tried to do was, I'd had sort of like a number of varied experiences, like research experiences, and I kind of used that to help me sort of build a coherent story about what I wanted to do and why I wanted to do it. And the way I landed on that, like for me, not in terms of like the SOP, but for me, the way I figured out what I wanted to do was, yeah, like I said, like I sought out varied research experiences in areas that I was interested in. And then when I started thinking about grad school, I try to think about like which parts of my experiences were the most impactful for me, were the ones that I kept thinking about even after that research study was over, and the ones that, like I kept coming back to and like thinking of like new questions to answer. So that's how I figured out for myself what I wanted to do. And in terms of the SOPs, what I did do was, while I had the same, like Taisha said, I kept it like broad enough to have some amount of flexibility. And in the SOPs in different programs, I also try to like incorporate the advisor that I was applying to, right? Their research into it, so that I was tailoring my questions in a way that would fit with my potential advisor's existing research program. yeah, and now that I'm in grad school, I'm answering some of the questions that I said I wanted to answer in my SOP. And I've also found like new areas that I want to explore further. And like Taisha said, it's also about, finding an advisor who will help you find the resources, or like give you the resources that you need to answer the questions you want to ask.
Yeah, I second everything that everyone just said. So when I was an undergrad, I was an RA in two different labs. I was an RA in like a social lab, which is the lab that I'm still in now. And then I was also an RA in a developmental emotion kind of lab. And so like as an undergrad, I thought like everything about psychology was super interesting. But when I started getting ready to apply for grad school, I really had to think about what interested me, and not just like what I wanted to do in the future, like as a career, but like what really drew my attention, what is the stuff that I actually care about and want to do research on. And that's basically how I decided what my research focus would be. And that I went more towards the social side. But I also definitely second being like not being too specific about your research interest. Like obviously you want to have like an idea about the kind of research that you want to do. And that'll also help you decide which advisor you want to and which program you want to go with. But at the end of the day, like your research idea, if it's too specific, it might not work out. Even if it's not, it could be a really great idea, but it might not work out. And you have to be able to sort of work with that and learn from that. That's what science is. That's how it works. So you definitely want to have like a research interest and some kind of idea, but be open to adjusting that and learning from it.
Yeah, I would again echo everything that all the panelists have already said. I think my responses are going to be a bit different, given that I had a different kind of experience. But basically what I did, so for PsyD programs, since they're more focused on clinical work, I basically had an idea based on experiences that I had working in inner city schools about what kind of work I wanted to do. And when I was writing my statements, it was more about how the programs could help me get to where I want to go based on my experiences. So working with inner city schools and children who grew up in very impoverished areas, going to this program and doing the work with these specific faculty members will help me get a better understanding of how to address the mental health needs of this particular community. And therefore, I will be able to go on and do XYZ in the future. So I think I really sort of focused on bringing my experience to the table, and then how the program could give me the tools that I needed to then go back into the community and do really meaningful work. So I think when you're doing the applications, whether or not it's research or clinical work, you really want to emphasize, number one, what you're bringing, and being open and flexible to the new experiences. But then also, once I get the training, what am I then going to do with this? Maybe having some idea of how this will impact the field of psychology, the field of mental health, as a result.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And leading into kind of personal statements and applications, we had a few questions that I'm going to group together kind of in how did you prep for applying to grad school? So that we had questions separately about how did you prepare for interviews? How did you prepare for your GREs? And how did you fill out applications? So I think that all those questions kind of encompass this larger, how did you get ready to apply to grad school? So you guys can focus on filling out applications, which we've already begun to talk about, but more specifically interview prep and GRE prep?
So my process started my junior year, in my opinion. So one thing that I will mention is that while at Rutgers-Newark, I am, well, I will say I am, but I graduated, but regardless, I'm still an EOF scholar, a McNair scholar, and a HLLC scholar. So using all those resources was able to assist in my grad school process. And I will also say that, like, for certain aspects, each came in handy. One of the biggest things I will say, though, is that junior year, I started to think about what I wanted to do. And I already, for the most part, I already knew I wanted to go into grad school. And that's where kind of McNair came in, try to zero in on what exactly you want to do. Do you want to do your master's, or do you want to go straight to your PhD? And for me, it was based on financial need, I will say. For me, it was my plan was PhD, because I know I wanted to go for any PhD program that would be fully funded, and that in the process, you'll get your master's. So I was like, I'm gonna shoot for the highest thing at the moment and hope I make it. And thank God I did. But really prepping, I started looking at schools junior year. I had like an Excel sheet that pretty much the way I created it, it was like the schools that I want to apply to, what are the things that I need for like the application process. So like, how many essays will I need? How many recommendations will I need? How many scores? Do I need a psychology GRE, or is it just a GRE that I need? And let's remember that when I was doing this, it was around deep into COVID time, like deep into COVID time. So it was a little bit different than I guess my other panelist experiences. But yeah, for one of the things I even needed to ask myself is, do I even need to submit the GREs? Which might not be the case for other panelists. So that's one thing I will say. Preparing for the GREs, the summer prior to my senior year, while I was working from 8 to 5, 6 to 7, I'm pretty much like eating, doing any little thing. 7 to like 10 o'clock, I'm prepping for the GREs. Breaks in between, of course, do not just like, that's not my method. I have to take breaks in between, make sure I'm understanding, I'm still alive, I'm still well. So that was kind of like my process for the GREs. So I studied throughout the entire time. I kind of scheduled it multiple times. I wish I had scheduled the GREs once, at least my junior year, and then again my senior year, but you also got to think about paying for that GREs. So be mindful of all those things. But also during that summer that I was working and preparing for the GREs, I was also working on my personal statement. I will always say to start working on your personal statement in advance, due to the fact that it's a big chunk and you will need to make revisions. Your first one might not be the best one, and it's okay. Asking for help is always a good thing. So my mentors came in handy. Oh, I had my mentors read my my personal statements like it was nothing. Like, I am waiting for all the red lines so I can improve on it and we can move on from it. Because first off, I will say, just a side note thing, making revisions is going to be your best friend once you get into a PhD, and I'm going to assume also a PsyD program. So get used to it. But that was like my personal statement time. And I will say I worked on my personal statement all the way up to closer to the deadline, just making sure that it was the best fit and it worked for each school, because you do have to kind of tweak it sometimes for each school, and sometimes schools ask for personal statements or diversity statements. So you have like 2 things that you need to work on. What else is there about preparation? Oh, interviews. McNair came in very handy when it came to interviews. I was able to get practice runs with them. And I would say, even if you're not able to get practice runs with like a specific program, YouTube, Google will help out. They will provide so many example questions that you can receive at a specific school. You can even look up a specific schools. Maybe they have like example questions that they might ask in the interview process. But one thing I will say is for the interview process, you need to make sure you know the people that are interviewing you and you have questions for the people who are interviewing you. Because one thing I will say, in the 2 schools that I ended up getting interviews for, majority of it for me at least was asking questions to the interviewer. So make sure you know who you're getting interviewed by. And I think that's like the general basis to like my process. I don't want to speak too long as there are other panelists, but I think that's like a short overview of how to prepare for it. Just make sure you do your research. Research. It's your life. How do you find out who will be interviewing you? They email you. So prior to the interview dates, they email you an agenda to how the interview will go. And for, like I said, my interview process occurred during COVID. We're still in COVID. So it occurred online for me. Most interviews do not occur online. You actually end up going to the school. I didn't get that experience, unfortunately, but there's the pros and cons to each, I guess.
I guess I could go. I had all online interviews because, like I said, I was an international student, even though this was like pre-COVID. But one of the plus sides, I think, of having online interviews is that you can, okay, what I did was I had small sticky notes of keywords that I knew I wanted to hit on my screen, and like, they're not going to know I'm going to look at it. If I look down at my notes, they're going to know I'm looking at something else. But like, if it's like on your screen right next to your camera, no one's going to know. And I found that, you know, when I start talking, sometimes when I'm in the flow, I sometimes like get caught up and forget about like the second or third point that I wanted to hit. And this is like an interview, so you don't want to be doing that, which is why I found those sticky notes to come in really handy. I second Taisha's suggestion of having trial runs. What I did, and I still do, is have mock interviews with my friends. I'm doing one tonight for one of my friends, so that's something that will really be useful for you guys as well. Even if you don't have like a program to do it, just get your friend to interview you. In terms of grad school apps, and keeping track of that, I'm not going to repeat what Taisha said, but I am going to share some grad school application trackers, like Excel sheet templates that you guys can use on the chat, and some other grad school application resources as well. You can refer to that. I just wanted to go back 1 minute. There was to one of the earlier questions, but I think it's relevant here as well. Things to think about as you're choosing which program to apply to, besides the advisors. I think it's also useful to note down your priorities in terms of what are you looking for and what are deal breakers for you, right? So for me, it was definitely, I needed full tuition. Like, I couldn't afford to go to grad school in the US. Like, no way was that happening. So I knew I needed full tuition and a good, like, a livable stipend. So that was something that was non-negotiable for me. And I think another thing to keep in mind, especially for people of color, is to be in a department which has a supportive environment for people of color and people of other marginalized communities. This is something that you can get to know through, you know, like sending an email to a grad student in the department, things like that. I didn't know I could do that, but in the last couple of years, people have been reaching out to me asking those very questions. So if you don't know it's possible, it's very much possible and an acceptable norm in academia. So definitely do that. Yeah, okay. Go back to like the question, but yeah, and Latoya, you guys go ahead.
Obviously I second everything that's been said, and so I won't repeat the stuff that's been said, but a couple things that I want to like emphasize. I would say that like being organized in applying is like one of the most important things. Yeah, so maybe these grad school app trackers are going to be really helpful. I didn't use anything like that, but definitely be organized. Like once you select the schools that you want to apply to, what do each of these schools need for their applications? When do you need to submit them by? Things like that. And then I think, oops, sorry. I think something to think about is that like one of the most early things that I had to prep for, at least, I don't know if this is still how it works. I feel old saying that. But I think like one of the first things that I did was prep for my GRE, because that's something that kind of had to be done earlier than a lot of the other stuff. Because, and one of the reasons is that, first of all, you have to like study, and then you have to schedule when you're going to take that GRE. And it's not like you can just go like any day and take it. You have to like, there's certain days that, or certain dates that the GRE is given, and then certain locations that you need to go to and like schedule. You can schedule it online, but like, yeah, it's not just like you can just like take the GRE any day. And then there's also like subject GREs that you might want to take as well, which are even harder to schedule. And then you also don't get your full score right away. You have to like wait a few weeks or something. I don't know if it's still like that, but that's at least how it was for me. And then I would say for interviews, definitely research the research of the people that are interviewing you. Be especially familiar with the research of your potential advisor. You know, ask questions and also be ready and open to talking about your ideas and your experiences. And then I would also say to ask questions about like the potential environment that you will be in. Like, what's the department like? Is it a supportive department? Like, what are the classes? How many classes will you have to be taking? What is it to like live in that area? Things like that, I think, are also important questions to ask.
Again, agree with everything everyone has said. I think also too, prepare for the unexpected. And the reason why I say that is because what happened with my interviews is that I got interviewed by somebody that I had no idea who they were. It was like a step in for somebody who was supposed to interview me, but was not there. And this person like had not seen my CV, just like didn't know anything about me. So I was sort of going from scratch. So like explain to this person who I was and, you know, why I wanted to be there. And I remember it caught me off guard a little bit. So definitely prepare for the unexpected. I also in my interview had a group interview process. So that's another thing that you may want to be aware of if you can get that information ahead of time. Just be aware of, you know, possible group interview and what that could be like, and think about yourself and your role in groups and how you know, show up in groups. And in hindsight, looking back on that entire time when I was applying, I think I could have paid more attention to my self-care. It's a stressful time. So I just want to put it out there that as much work as you're putting into doing the applications and making sure everything is like as great as it can be, definitely take some time to take care of yourself as well, because that will also reduce your anxiety on interview day, because interview day can be stressful as well. So definitely keep that in mind.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. So I have one last question that I'm going to ask, and then I'm going to open up to students in the audience. So this question is, what is your overall time commitment to classes versus research or other clinical work?
On my end, I think it varies on like a weekly basis. For the simple fact that, I think a big portion of what I need to mention is that for me, I came into like with a TA-ship and not a research assistantship or a fellowship. I guess that's the best way to explain that. Meaning that I'm doing a lot of 20 hours per week, I'm doing TA work. I am either teaching a course or grading assignments or doing something of that sort. I actually TA for 2 instructors. Wow, my accent is coming out. But I TA for 2 instructors, and that's definitely an interesting experience because they have 2 different styles. One is organized, one not so much. So you have to work with that and be able to also, let's just say time management is key. And 20 hours of pretty much every week is some sort of TA work being done. I will say that I have 3 courses that work. 3 courses that are credit-wise, and then I have a lot of pass or fail courses that are mandatory for like APA certification, as well as just like grad school stuff in regards to like TAing. So I have to take a class to teach me how to TA, which if any of you have done, you do also at in your undergrad, you also do that there. So I do these things. So I think that's like, the classes that are worth credits are all 2 hours. So 2, 4, 6. So that's 6 hours right there. So I'm already at 26 hours. And then research, I will say for like this first semester is like 5 to 10 hours. So I don't know how many hours I'm at anymore. I failed at counting, but it is a lot of time being used. But one of the things that I know they do at GW is that like while you're technically doing 20 hours, it's really 15 hours of TA-ship, and then 5 hours or the 5 extra hours are used for like your research, because really what you're there for, like what's paying for you to be there is your TA-ship. So that does come in priority. But the TAs, I mean, the instructors that I work with, they're all like, well, we want you to be here, but we're not going to give you that much work because your research comes in first and your student first. So you just have to make sure to also choose professors that are kind of like, that understand you and are supportive of that. So, and communication, so time management and communication is key in making sure you're okay, because at the end of the day, I think we'll say you'll mention a really big thing, self-care during the application process, but also self-care during the grad school process, because it can get hectic. So yeah.
Yeah, that is so true. It takes a bit of adjustment to kind of hit your stride in terms of how to balance all of these things out. And I really, really struggled with that. I think God knows I'm still struggling with it. But yeah, I think it's something that you need to take time off to take care of yourself. Like grad students' mental health is notoriously bad. I think I saw a stat the other day about like some 40% of grad students having like depressive symptoms or something, which is worrying. So and just like the academy in many ways is not structured for like fostering well-being or mental health, unfortunately. So it's on to us in many cases to take care of ourselves. In terms of time commitments, I think for TAing, it really depends, at least in my experience, it really depends on what course you're TAing for and the workload that you're assigned based on that, because some courses might have a heavier load than others, and your time commitment might differ based on that. In terms of classwork, I was taking, I think, 2 courses every semester, which was like 2-hour classes, 2.5-hour classes. So that's like 5 to 6 hours every week. But one thing about grad school classes is they're, well, at least like in research programs, I don't know how it is in PsyD or clinical programs, but in research PhD programs, they are low-key in the sense that no one's going to ask you for your grades, and no one's really going to fail you unless you do really, 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 really badly. as long as you're putting in the work, as long as you are trying and taking things seriously and sort of approaching it with an attitude to learn and not just, flippantly, you're going to be fine. And yeah, I think sometimes like when we come in straight from undergrad or a master's and we're kind of coming in with a mindset of like, this is like a classroom and like I need to this is the place, like this is the only place I learn, and that's not the case with grad school. In grad school, most of your learning is happening outside of the classroom, where you're sort of like immersed in your own research, right? So that may be something to keep in mind in terms of sort of adjusting, like balancing your time commitments for these different things.
Yeah, I would say like also like like at least research like PhD program classes are more like they're primarily discussion based. There aren't like tests or things like that, at least most of the time. There's like like readings that you have to do every week, and then you come to class and you kind of discuss those readings, and people have different perspectives on the readings, and yeah, so as long as you're like doing the readings and like contributing to the conversations in classes, then you do like a final paper at the end most of the time. And yeah, like you're almost, if you do those things, and like you're almost guaranteed to get an A. Yeah, so I am in my 4th year, so I don't take classes anymore, but because like you have to take a certain amount of credits, and usually like, well, at least for me, I finish in my 3rd year, finishing all those classes. But before I finished my classes, I would say that my research took up most of my time during the week, even when I was taking classes and TAing. I would go to the classes. They would be maybe like 5-6 hours a week, the classes themselves, and then maybe they'll work outside of the class, maybe like, I don't know, it depends. Obviously it's going to vary, but maybe like another 5 or 6 hours. And then when TAing, I don't think that I would ever spend more than like TAing and grading, and because I'm also a grader, so maybe like not more than like 10 hours a week. And then the rest of my time was doing research. And that means a bunch of things. That means like reading, running studies, training RAs to run the studies, analyzing data, writing stuff, submitting stuff to conferences. Or if your research worked out, then you're submitting to a journal for a publication or something. Yeah, so, and now, like I said, I finished my classes. So once you finish your classes, you can still like, at least in our program, you can still like sit in on other classes if you're still interested in learning something in a different class. Because you might also feel like you miss taking classes or something. I know that kind of might sound weird, but yeah. And so now like a lot of my time is more focused on research and preparing to do my dissertation. So preparing for my proposal, and that requires like a lot of reading and running studies, designing studies, a lot of data analyzing, meetings with my advisor, again with our A's, things like that. And so yeah, most of my time is taken up by that, or by my TA responsibilities. Yeah.
So on the clinical side, it's a little bit different. So you have your classes. I feel like in the first year, your schedule is kind of set. Like they already sort of give you the foundational classes that you have to take. There's not a lot of wiggle room. there, but then second, third, fourth year, you're able to take more of the kinds of classes that you want in terms of your interests and what you want to specialize in. But in your first year, you're pretty much handed the class schedule. And then, so on top of courses, you also have to do a practicum. And that's basically like a fieldwork experience. So you're placed at a site, and there's a certain amount of hours you have to do at that site. And depending on how many hours you're at that site, that's how many clients that you will see for therapy. And so within that clinical site, you also have a didactic component that you have to go to that is separate from your clinical work at that site. In addition to that, also had clients that we were given that we were working with that matched the theories that we were learning. So if we were learning about psychodynamic therapy, then we had to treat someone in our university clinic with that modality. If we were taking a CBT course, then we had to see a client in our clinic with that modality. And then we had to talk about it in our class. So between the classes, your practicum, your clinic hours, and then the other thing with PsyD programs, they're not funded like PhD programs are. So you kind of have to work for the money that they're giving you. And it's not full funding either. You may get partial, you may get half, it just kind of depends. So my funding was tied to this project. There was a committee on diversity, and there was a faculty member that was head of the committee on diversity within the university. And so my funding was tied to assisting her with all the initiatives that came with being the head of that committee. And so I was going to meetings, I was, writing minutes, I was pretty much doing anything that she assigned me to do with regards to that committee. So there was a lot of responsibility first year. I feel like first year was a lot, and then second year got even worse. But then third and fourth year, as you're taking less and less classes, it kind of eases up a little bit, but then you get into the dissertation process. So, I guess it's like, what do they say? 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It's like a trade-off. So yeah, just be prepared to just be very busy all the time. And like everybody talked about, making sure that you're finding a balance, because it is important.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. Appreciate your responses to all of our questions so far. Now we wanted to open up to the audience. If you guys have any questions you'd like to ask our panelists, please feel free to turn on your camera and unmute yourself. You can also type it in the chat, whatever you feel most comfortable.
How or when did y'all figure out what field you wanted to specialize in?
Well, for me, I will say that I think there's something that they kind of tell you not to do, but for me, it's based on personal experience. The research that I'm interested in is kind of stems from like a personal experience. So I always wanted to kind of do more about it. Being an HLLC scholar, your second concentration is social justice, and that's a big thing for me. That also goes back into the I wanted to do research into exposure to community violence, and right now my outcome is academic grades, but I do see that it could change and go into various aspects of that. So based on that research, and knowing that I wanted to also use my research to make an impact in my immediate community, as well as the community that I was kind of like raised in, which would be Haiti. That's kind of how I figured out where I wanted to go. And that was clinical psychology for me, where I'm able to become a therapist. So kind of like, it kind of goes into like my bio. So I want to be, own my own private practice, but also be able to teach. And that if you are at Rutgers University, Newark, and you've had Dr. Lamort, you know that he probably tells you that like during the day, he practices therapy, and then at night he's there teaching. That's kind of like one of the things that I want to follow in a sense. So shout out to Dr. Lamort, one of my favorite professors. So that's kind of like how I figured out what I wanted to do.
I kind of like was on the fence about what I wanted to do right up until I started applying. I was also interested in going into clinical PhD programs, but I ended up just doing a social PhD program. And I was on the fence about both. I really liked the research that I was doing, which was in the social psych area. And I felt like there was important stuff to be done there, you know, that could have like an impact. And that's why I was leaning towards that. But I also was on the fence because I thought like maybe I could do clinical research, and then also probably do clinical work. And I yeah, that's like that. I wanted to like maybe become a therapist, and I thought maybe I should do a clinical PhD. But at the end of the day, like what I was interested in learning more about and doing was the social psychology research. And so that's why I went with that. Like, I'm going to be spending a bunch of years doing this work. And, you know, who knows what's going to happen in the future. So I'd rather just like do the stuff that I really care about and I'm interested in. Like, what is the stuff that I want to read about? Like, I don't like, you don't want to be reading about stuff that you're not interested in. You're going to be spending a lot of time doing that. So what interests you? What really interests you? And I think that's how I made my decision, and I would suggest that's how others make their decisions as well. Should we answer the question in the chat, or?
Yeah, sure. If I don't know if any other panelist want to answer the previous question. If not, we can go to the next question.
I was waiting for Latoya to jump in, but I can go ahead. Wait, so the question was, oh, how do we figure out? Yeah, so I don't know how helpful this is, but I knew basically from my first social psych class in my first year of undergrad that if I ever did a PhD, I wanted to do it in social psych. I think this idea was reinforced as through the years, the questions that kept interesting me were being answered in the social psych literature and were best answered through that perspective. I will say that while I knew that, I also used sort of a process of elimination because I'm a big fan of keeping my options open. So like I said, I sought out different experiences. I interned at a psych hospital. I interned with like a clinician with a private practice. I did like independent research projects, things like that. I also did a master's in applied psychology with a clinical concentration, because again, like keep my options open. And I knew, like by the end of the program, I knew that I did not want to go into therapy. I mean, I could live with, you know, like doing assessments, but I knew that therapy was not my cup of tea. And that just kind of, you know, like just solidified it for me even more that, yeah, social psych is what I wanted to do. And oh yeah, one more thing to keep in mind, think about what you want to do after grad school, right? What kind of career do you want to prepare yourself for? What kind of a career do you want to have? And think about how the field of grad school Valeria, I'm so there with you, might help, like might give you the tools for that. And you don't have to like settle on one specific idea. You can't, I mean, one specific area. You can have a few different, like a general idea, right, of what you want to do in life, which is sounding existential, but okay, I'm done now.
Yeah, I think the best way is through experience. You know, I think experience kind of tells you what is most meaningful for you, right? Like being able to do some kind of work, whether it's being immersed in research or doing clinical work, I think you kind of find what you feel connected to and what you feel passionate about. As I was like thinking about this question, I'm sitting here like, how did I get to be here? But what I'm realizing as I'm thinking about all my experiences is the one common thread for me is trauma work. So I started out, like I said, as a school psychologist, and I didn't have the language for trauma. I didn't know what I was seeing. And that's really what prompted me to go back to school. And getting experiences through all the different sites that I did practicums at, when I went on internship, which is like a whole other beast that we could probably have a whole other webinar about what that looks like. That was like trial by fire. And then now coming out the other side, you know, being finished and being licensed, all of the different settings that I've been in, the one consistent theme has been working with people who have complex trauma. And that's what just feels for me like I'm doing something, like I'm having some kind of impact. I'm making a difference in some way. So I think when you get some experience, you kind of see what fits.
Awesome, thank you. And Victoria asks, is it advisable to work while in grad school?
I can't. That's like a breach in contract for me if I was to at the very moment. So for my program, it's like a no-no. Like we're paying you enough to not have to work, you know, and to be able to live and eat and, you know, survive. But I feel like as a grad student, I don't think I've ever met like a grad student who says that the amount of money that the school provides is enough. So to each his own, but you do, I think a big topic that we discussed like prior is like making sure that wherever you go, it meets like certain needs. So when I did get like the acceptance and I did see the amount of money, I was like, okay, cool. This is a lot of money. But then you have to realize you have to make it fit for like this amount of time. And then you also have to make sure that this money that you're receiving also fits for like the location that you're in. So I'm in like a popular area. Like I'm in DC. Do I live in DC? No. Way too expensive. Gentrification is out its mind right now. No. I live in a neighborhood that's like right next to it. So I take a train, next stop, I'm there. So I live in Virginia, which is a little bit cheaper. So you will find a lot of students, and like at least in my program, they tend to live in the neighborhood. Anywho, the next neighborhood. That's what I wanted to say. So that's like the biggest thing. But I know for me, I cannot work while in my program due to my contract that I signed. So that's me.
Yes, same with me. I don't I'm an international student, so I can't work in the US legally outside of what like the stipend that I get from the school for TAing. But I will, like Taisha reminded me that in terms of money and the stipend, when you are when you're at interviews and stuff and like research and grad programs, one thing you want to do is check whether you will receive a stipend for the summer as well. Because in a lot of programs, the stipend is an academic year stipend. So during the academic year, you get a stipend from like TAing or your RA-ship or whatever it is. But then that doesn't cover your summer funding. So you definitely want to ask that specifically at interviews and stuff. Also, like, yes, I don't think I've heard of any grad school funding that's like sufficient to like live a lavish lifestyle, maybe in business schools, I don't know. But yeah, you really need to like learn money skills and live frugally.
Yeah, also I'm not allowed to work outside of what I do at school. Yeah, so also when I was an undergrad, I was kind of confused by all of these things, like, but a lot of PhD programs are funded, meaning that like at least for the program at Rutgers-Newark, you get complete tuition coverage, like you don't have to pay for tuition, and you get a stipend, which is like what you make in a year. And that'll depend on like, the amount will depend on the school, and hopefully the area that you live in. Like if you live by a city, those schools should probably pay you more. It doesn't always work out that way, but that's how it should work. But it's not a lot of money, like, you know, maybe like 20 to 30K like a year. So yeah, that's why like I also have never met a grad student that said like that's a great salary. But I also have never been a grad student that was like, I could add more work to my life. You know, I've never met a grad student that does that, that has thought that either. So yeah, like personally, I don't see how I would be able to work another job. But again, it's not possible. I mean, unless you have like some special reason or something, you could probably ask permission from your school. I know people that have done that. Like if you have children or something and, you know, you need to work this other job. And also people have done that. I don't know how they do that. They're like absolute superheroes. I have no idea how they do that because it's enough work as it is. It's like a lot of work as it is. So yeah.
Yeah, agreed. It's definitely hard just to find the time. But people do it, maybe very part-time, minimally in the PsyD program. We weren't forbidden just because, again, our programs aren't funded the same way PhD programs are. So we could work. I think my first year, I might have been an adjunct, but then after that, I couldn't, it wasn't sustainable. So people got creative with finding, you know, sources of income, just finding like on-campus jobs that they could do for a couple of hours. I applied for, the APA has a minority fellowship program, which will pay your tuition and give you a stipend. I applied for that, and that was a big help. So I think, you know, if it's not possible to work, then, you know, maybe you can look into some programs like that that will give you funding.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Does anyone else have a question they want to ask our panelists before we wrap up?
I'm just going to comment on Jaleesa's statement because it stuck out to me. I will say that while you may feel like this is overwhelming, I do feel like it's because a lot of information is coming to you. Don't say it's impossible. I will say that because I do have like a classmate right now who also has kids, married, like a whole life outside of the program. I will say we all have lives outside of the program, but just to compare to what you're mentioning, it's not impossible. You just have to make sure that you're ready for this process and that everyone, like you have, I think a big part of being in a grad program is like having the support. I think support is a big thing. So while technically I say like I'm here by myself, I do have support of my advisor, my cohort, my loved ones, and that's like a big thing. So when I get overwhelmed or when things are happening, it's like they're there to like calm me down, like Taisha, you're thinking way too ahead sometimes. Because one of the biggest things for me, and it might be for a few of us, but I'm like an overachiever and I overthink. not the best combination for grad school. But I will say that right now this might sound overwhelming because we're saying so much, but as you take it day by day, it's not as bad as it seems right now, especially because we're all saying it in like less than half an hour. Not half an hour, an hour and a half. So take your time and you'll figure out what's best for you. But yeah, Vidi also had a question. And I think she said, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Thanks. Vidi, I think you're asking, how did you know when to start trying to gain experience in your respective fields while in your undergraduate year?
So when I was an undergrad, so I think like if you're interested in going for a PhD, I would say even if you're not sure and you're an undergrad, I would say to join a lab as a research assistant. Like some people have mentioned here, even if that's not, if you're not sure that's what you want to do, at least it's like process of elimination. You're like, okay, I did that, I didn't like it. And even if you don't like it, I'm 100% sure it'll be useful to you for something. It'll look good on your resume and you'll definitely learn something. Yeah, I always recommend undergrads to do this, whether or not they want to do research in the future. I think it's 100% useful. And definitely do that if you are interested in doing a PhD program. And when to start that? As soon as possible. If you can get into a research a lab as a research assistant in like your sophomore year or something, that's what I did. That's amazing. And also, you know, I think attending these things are great. I think you can also be a teaching assistant. All these things I think are going to serve you well in your application process and also in figuring out what you want to do or if it is something that you want to do.
I think to add on to that, for me, I was the person that was involved in like everything in psychology. Once I figured out that mathematics was no longer my passion and that it wasn't it for me anymore. So one of the things that Valeria mentioned, I hope I said your name right, but is being a TA. So I didn't take research methods or stats methods yet, so I didn't want to get too involved into like the research experience, which I feel like was a downfall on my end. I should have just did it. It probably would have helped with those courses. But I got involved in TAing. So I TA'd with Dr. Zambrano for three or four semesters. And then I was a learning assistant for another 2 semesters. So I really immersed myself in that experience because I knew I wanted to become a professor. So being able to have that experience teaching a recitation or even assisting a grad student when it came to providing feedback and research methods, which ironically, I'm a TA for now as a grad student. So it helped out and it worked out in my favor. But when I was able to get into the research experience, I definitely tried to go into that as much as possible because I knew that that was very much needed for pursuing a PhD and things like that. So I got involved in a lab that I just wanted to get the experience really. And it helped out because it helped in knowing how to deal with adolescents, which is participants that I'm currently working with. But I also did a senior thesis with Dr. Boxer. Great mentor. So I will say like in getting involved in the research actually helped me in understanding what I wanted to do because I had that mentor. So I had Dr. Zambrano like, all right, she saw what I was able to do, provided feedback in like my teaching methods and things like that. And then I also had Dr. Boxer who helped a lot with figuring out how to write properly when it comes to, well, formally in psychology. So those 2 experiences really helped in figuring out like what I want to do and how to go about it. So having great mentors is a big thing, but to get to getting a mentor, you also have to put yourself out there as well. So I think that's the biggest thing. Side note, I worked with Fahima while I was in undergrad.
I just want to add that when I started being a research assistant, I hadn't yet taken research methods or stats. But then when I took those classes, they it was like so much more useful to me, I feel like, because I already felt like I understood how psychology works. And yeah, and you definitely don't have to know statistics to apply to be a research assistant. And you don't have to know everything about the area that you're gonna go in to be a research assistant for. You're gonna be there to learn. It's like for you too. You're gonna be doing things that are gonna help you understand these things more. So I just wanted to say, don't be nervous. Don't think that you need to know statistics or anything like that. So yeah.
My experience was very different because I'm an international student, so I don't really think my experience will be applicable here. But I did drop a link with research internships that you guys can apply to. Those look really prestigious they look really good on your CV when you do them.
Yeah, so I just want to say I was an undergrad at Rutgers-Newark, and I also TA'd when I was an undergrad. But also, I don't know, like if you don't know where to start to apply to do those things, like if you don't know where to, if you're like, oh, I want to be a research assistant but don't know how or something, you can also like talk to professors that you're in classes, your psychology classes. If you're like, oh, this class is so interesting, I really like this professor, I wonder if this professor has a lab that I can be a research assistant in. I think like that's a really good way to start. That's how I got involved in one of the labs that I was involved in. And there's also these resources online that you can look for as well. And also at the main office in the psychology department on Smith and the 3rd floor.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. I just dropped the link in the chat to the recording for our last meeting where we talked about applying to be a research assistant at Rutgers, field work that's offered through the psychology department, TA-ships and learning assistantships. So check that out for information on different opportunities in the department. And thank you so much to our panelists for taking the time out of their super busy schedule to be with us today and answer all of our questions. It's super helpful to hear from people who are in the process or have already gone through the process. So thank you so much to everyone for being here today. And thank you for our audience for your questions. I hope you have a good night and happy holidays that are coming up soon.
Thank you so much. This was so great.
Thanks, Fahima.
Thanks. And also feel free to, if you want to reach out to, I'm not going to speak on anyone's behalf, but if you want to reach out to me and hear anything or ask any more questions, I tend to make myself very much available. So feel free to reach out to me. I guess I can put my information in the chat, but I can also, like, you can also find out from Dr. Zambrano or anybody in Psych really. Got my email. Wow.